What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. So Matt Fraction's Immortal Iron Fist is amazing, and this is one of those instances where a character in Marvel Comics gets like a wholesale relaunch, and that happens in comic books in general from time to time, right? Like a person pops up on the scene in the 1970s, 1980s, they're just kind of considered a low-level street kind of character, nobody really cares that much about them, and then somewhere along the line, a writer comes up and then just changes everything. Like Jeff Johns did it with Green Lantern, right? I mean, for decades, Hal Jordan was a hero that no one cared about. I mean, his stories were not selling. You could hardly ever sell a Hal Jordan story. They even got rid of him and replaced him with Kyle Rayner. But then Jeff Johns came along and just revamped the entire mythos. And it changed everything about the entirety of the Green Lantern's line of stories going forward, because what it did is it made them wildly interesting. It made them really intriguing. It took the character of Sinestro and turned him from a archetypical villain who's just there to try to make life rough for Hal Jordan and turned him into a really, really cool and charismatic bad guy. And so what happened with Matt Fraction's Immortal Iron Fist is he did the exact same thing with Danny Rand. Danny Rand first showed up in the 1970s. He was a street level character. They killed him off by having him punch through a wall. I mean, he was a totally irrelevant guy. I mean, he would show up from time to time, but there was never an instance where I would sit down and say, yeah, man, Iron Fist has one of the richest legacies in the history of Marvel Comics. He was not the X-Men. He was not the Avengers. He wasn't in Captain America. He wasn't even Iron Man. He was just a guy who was there. But what Matt Fraction's story does is it changes all that, and it makes Iron Fist extremely cool. So the cool thing about this is that Matt Fraction's kind of grabbing a few things here and there from the Iron Fist mythos, but for the most part, he's just making things up on the spot, and it actually works out really, really well. But what this does is it basically picks up with Iron Fist facing off against a legion of Hydra, like a legion of Hydra forces. I mean, just facing off against every last one of them. Now, we don't know why that's happening. What we do is we actually transition back to earlier in the day, and what we end up finding out is that there is a Chinese company that's basically wanting to get involved with with Daniel Rand's company. There we go, with Rand Incorporated. The idea is to basically use Rand Incorporated's resources in order to bolster what it is that's going on with regards to China, specifically to basically get involved with funding like a transportation track, like a train track or something along those lines. But the idea is that this company is willing to invest $10 billion to do it. Daniel Rand says no. Danny Rand says no, and the reason why he says no is because of the fact that China has a terrible human rights record, and Danny Rand does not want to be involved with Wygo Industries because of China's human rights record. And so with this in mind, Wygo Industries more or less just kind of walks away and says you're a fool for throwing away $10.5 billion. And even Jaren Hogarth is kind of the same mind. Now keep in mind, Jaren Hogarth is basically the brains behind the operation. I mean, in Netflix, Jaren Hogarth is actually a woman, but in the comics, Jaren Hogarth is kind of the brains behind the operation, keeping the company running. So it's very much this sort of Pepper Potts, Tony Stark dichotomy, right? Like Pepper Potts is the one that keeps the company in working order. Tony Stark just spends money. And that's really what Daniel Rand does, but he kind of focuses on being a superhero. But his suspicions are that Wygo Industries is a front, and that Wygo Industries is operating as a legitimate arm for Hydra. Now, of course, this takes Danny Rand to the Wygo Industries headquarters, only to find out that the building is literally just a ghost building. I mean, it's totally phantom. I mean, there's desks, there's computers, but no one works there. It's designed for show. Now, something to point out here in Marvel Comics is that a lot of organizations do this. Like Hydra does it, Secret Empire did it back in the 1970s, 1980s, Advanced Idea Mechanics does it. A lot of these clandestine organizations operate through like shell companies, or they operate using legitimate fronts in order to carry out their goals. And really what seemed to be going on here with regards to Daniel Rand, or at least to Rand Industries, was that Wygo Industries was wanting to use Daniel Rand's company as money laundering, in the sense that they would basically flow money through Danny Rand's company, and then it would come out clean on the other side, and there'd be no way to trace where it was that Wygo Industries money was coming from in the first place. But regardless of what their intentions were, Danny Rand's suspicions proved to be right, in the sense that he's confronted by the entirety of Hydra. And this is kind of cool, because what this does is it kind of shows us where Danny Rand stands, right? Like when it comes to individual people, when it comes to normal individuals, Danny Rand can easily run right over them. But then we have like this thing called the Mecha Gorgon. And this is designed to kind of, this is really Matt Fraction kind of toying with Hydra. Like Hydra is just one of these holdovers from old school Marvel Comics, but their stories were always kind of really fun, in the sense that it was like, here's an organization that's somewhat serious, but also kind of silly. I mean, they have a mecha Gorgon, for crying out loud. Like, I mean, it's clearly something that's designed to be a bit of a joke, but it's also kind of cool because Danny Rand can't necessarily take this thing out on his own because he doesn't really possess the power to do it on his own. And so again, he's more or less kind of knocked off this roof, and it seems like, you know, it's not really the end of Danny Rand so much as the fact that he's temporarily defeated. But what we do here is we transition to what looks like an opium den. And this opium den is being occupied by a guy named Orson Randall. Now, the cool thing about this is that Orson Randall, of course, you know, after the whole experience, more or less returns home. But when he does, there are a couple of girls that show up at his door saying, you know, our sister and I have come to ease your, you know, to make life easier on you. Use your imagination. And then Orson Randall kind of fights off against the two of them, but he demonstrates use of the Iron Fist. And when he asks these girls who they are or where they came from, they turn into swans and they fly away. And so this is Matt Fraction kind of messing with us, saying, hey, look, there's some big things going on here. And so what this does is it sets Danny Rand and it sets Orson Randall on a collision course, in the sense that Orson Randall basically leaves from where he's at and begins the process of trying to track down Danny Rand. Now, again, with regards to Danny going against these Hydra forces, in the end, he's basically rescued by Luke Cage. We don't really know exactly how he does it, but he's rescued by Luke Cage, and he's basically taken to Night Nurse. Now, with regards to Marvel Comics, for those of you guys who are not well versed in this, I know a lot of you guys have, you know, experience with regards to watching Netflix and learning about Rosario Dawson's Night Nurse. What you see in Netflix is par for the course when it comes to Night Nurse. There's been a few different iterations of Night Nurse, but at the end of the day, the role is always still very much the same, in the sense that Night Nurse is basically a nurse that takes care of superheroes who have injuries and so on and so forth, so they don't have to go to a normal hospital. The reason being because Danny Rand wouldn't want to take off his mask at a hospital and people find out that the head of Rand Industries is a superhero operating at night. But what this also does is it shows us the relationship between Luke Cage and Danny Rand. And that's really something that a lot of people were looking for in the Iron Fist TV show, or at least what they're going to be looking for is something akin or something tying into the notion of Iron Fist and Luke Cage, because these two have an extremely long history of Marvel Comics. And in fact, you can probably go watch my video on Luke Cage Explained, because that really runs over a lot of the history between himself and Iron Fist. It was really just pairing together two superheroes whose comics weren't selling, that it actually led to one of the most entertaining comic book runs regarding the two characters, because it just worked. It was a great blend of action and comedy, and even what's going on right now in all new, all different Marvel with Power Man and Iron Fist is really, really funny. The problem is I did videos on it, nobody cared. So it's one of those comics that I just kind of read for my own enjoyment, but it's still a really enjoyable line of publications. But what we're also shown here is that Misty Knight, that Colleen Wing, and so on, they've created their own heroes for hire. Now, I wanted to wait until this section of the story to cover this, but Immortal Iron Fist takes place in the aftermath of Civil War. And that's one of the reasons why Danny Rand went to Night Nurse, because if he had gone to a public hospital, even if he was willing to give up his identity, he would be arrested. Because remember, in the aftermath of Civil War, like Tony Stark's team won, like the bad guys won, so to speak. So registration is the law. You have to register your identity, you have to register your power, so on and so forth, with SHIELD and the federal government. If you don't, then you'll be taken into custody. But during the Civil War videos that I did, if you remember, Misty Knight had launched her own Heroes for Hire. Now, the reformation of Heroes for Hire under Misty Knight just served the purpose of Marvel, you know, just kind of bringing the team together so that Tony Stark would have a way to find Captain America, because he was operating underground. And Misty Knight's contacts, Misty Knight's resources would have allowed her to locate Captain America. So it was a really great way to blend these upper echelon superheroes with the street level superheroes. But again, this is really just kind of reminding us what the environment's like right now, that Iron Fist, Danny Rand, can't just go out into the world, that Danny Rand can't just go to normal places operating as Iron Fist, because he'll be arrested by SHIELD if he does. Now, from here, we pick back up with Orson Randall. And Orson Randall is really kind of cool here, because using Iron Fist, what he does is he shows us maneuvers that we've never really seen before. For example, he uses the Iron Fist in a way that basically hypnotizes a guy as Orson Randall is making his way into the US, and he's asked by the TSA, like, we need your passport, we need your claims document declaration. He says, he uses this kind of, you know, hypnotic movement, and then it's just kind of allowed to go free. And so again, it creates a really cool situation here, because it's this constant expansion on what it is that's going on with regards to the Iron Fist mythos. But in terms of the really huge change that Matt Fraction made, this comes in the form of Jaren meeting with Danny Rand. And what happens is Jaren says, look, where you turned down Wygo Industries and you said you don't want to have anything to do with them, what seems to be happening is a hostile takeover. Now, what that usually means is that if you have a company that's publicly traded, which which means that you can buy shares on the stock market. What Wygo Industries is doing is basically going through and buying a majority stake in Rand Industries, which means that in terms of controlling the company, they'll be the ones running the show. And Danny Rand will basically be the small man, or he'll have the minority shares of the company. But in the midst of all this information that Danny Rand is getting, his hand just starts to flare up. And the reason why is because Orson Randall is using the Iron Fist technique. And this is cool because what this tells us is that where the traditional school of thought would have been that Danny Rand being the Iron Fist meant that he had the entirety of the heart of Shu Lao's energy to himself. Instead, it's not that way. That there are multiple people who can tap into this and multiple people can use it. But what it also means is that if two individuals use the Iron Fist at the same time, it creates this sort of energy feedback in the one who's not using it that creates, its own kind of physical pain. So again, it's really Matt Fraction just kind of building on the mythos and expanding things. And it's even Danny Rand himself coming to the realization that someone else is using the Iron Fist. Now, in Danny Rand's mind, that shouldn't be possible because there's only ever allowed to be one Iron Fist at a time. Now, the reason why, combining what we're seeing here along with traditional knowledge on the Iron Fist mythos, the reason why there's only ever allowed to be one Iron Fist at a time is because that we basically have two people splitting the power in half. And so Danny Rand has the power of the Iron Fist, but so does Orson Randall. And what this situation presents to us is the idea that Danny Rand never had the full contents of the Iron Fist unto himself. Instead, he was always sharing it with Orson Randall, whether he knew it or not. And so it creates this really, really interesting situation because then it begs the question, well, what would happen if Danny Rand had the full power of the Iron Fist? And so what this does is this transitions to Wygo Industries Tower, picks up with a guy by the name of Steel Serpent, also known as Davos. Now, Davos' publication history in Marvel Comics was the very definition of an irrelevant villain. He had always faced off against Danny Rand. He had always gone against him as an enemy. He's one of his oldest foes, but it was always like a holdover. It was always this sort of archaic villain where it was like this stereotypical guy, like, well, I'm gonna get you this time, Danny Rand. It was always that way. What Matt Fraction is doing is coming back and saying, no, that's not the case. That Brother Davos, that Steel Serpent, is a very formidable villain, that he's a formidable bad guy, of course, being the son of Lei Kung the Thunderer. There we go. What a mouthful. The guy that trained Danny Rand in order to basically conquer Shu Lao the Dragon and attain the heart of the dragon, allowing him to have the Iron Fist. What this does is it sort of updates the rivalry between Danny Rand and Davos to a more modern sense, in a more modern way. And so ultimately what this does is it kind of brings, again, Orson Randall and Danny Rand into conflict with one another when Orson Randall basically buys a guy's suit and then shows up at Rand Industries in the office of Danny. And the two of them start going head to head. And the funny thing about this is that it seems as though when it comes to like fighting styles, when it comes to just use of the Iron Fist, that experience is the key to success. Danny Rand has been an Iron Fist for quite some time, but he's not been an Iron Fist anywhere near as long as Orson Randall has. And so on the surface, it seems like Danny Rand is basically being totally overcome and getting absolutely crushed. But in the end, he actually ends up coming out, or at least holding his own against Orson Randall. Not only that, Orson Randall basically says, look, you look nothing like your father, which is Matt Fraction revealing to us that Orson Randall taught Danny Rand's father, which basically bolsters the mythos of his dad, because all we really knew about Danny Rand's father was the fact that he ran a company, he was betrayed by a friend, his father was looking for the mystical city of Kunlun, died in the process, and then Danny Rand was discovered by some of the monks within Kunlun, and then went on to become Iron Fist. That was all we knew. There was virtually nothing to it because his father served as a catalyst. It serves as part of the hero's journey, where the characters just kind of thrust into adventure. Danny Rand lost his father, his mother was eaten by wolves, he was discovered by monks, the Iron Fist legacy begins. That was it. And so it creates really this interesting situation. What we also end up finding out here is with regards to the Iron Fist mythos, that there's been about 60 some odd people before Danny Rand who called themselves the Iron Fist. Not only that, the reason why Orson Randall is basically being pursued is because of the fact that what's coming up is something called the Tournament of the Seven Heavenly Cities. And again, this is a really cool thing because this is a huge expansion to the Iron Fist mythos. It's one of the reasons why I love it so much. But transitioning back to Davos for a second, what he is essentially a kind of adopted character, adopted son, so to speak, in the sense that he's basically a guy who is borrowing power. That's really all he's doing. He's not like really Iron Fist. He's not really able to tap into the energies of Shu Lao or any other kind of mystical energies. Instead, these energies are basically being loaned to him. Now, in terms of how we'll find that out, well, of course, we'll get to that here in a second. But what this does is it sort of thickens the plot a little bit. And of course, it picks up with Jaren. And all that's really happening here is the head of Wygo Industries is more or less telling Jaren, you're going to to basically give us what it is that we're asking for from Rand Industries, or we're going to kill your mom. That's really it. That's really all that's going on. But what this does is it transitions back to Davos and it joins with Crane Mother. Now, this is where things begin to expand a little bit, because again, what's happening here is Davos is getting his energy from Crane Mother, and Davos is being tasked with killing Orson Randall. Now, the reason why this matters is because we sort of jump back to 1933, and we basically meet up with the heads of these 7 heavenly cities. And what goes on is every once in a while, there's a tournament where these cities all basically align with one another. And the tournament ends up seeing the different individual cities' version of Iron Fist, the Immortal Warriors is basically what they're called. But they all face off against one another in a tournament to see which one is the best of all the cities. The issue with this is that Orson Randall refused to participate because of the fact that he had basically fled Kunlun, and in doing so became embroiled in part of World War I. And in all the death and destruction that he saw, he lost his taste for battle and for war. And so when the time came when he was supposed to fight on behalf of Kunlun, he said no. He basically ran away. The judgment of the council, under the direction, or at least under the prodding of Crane Mother, was that Orson Randall would be stripped of his position as Iron Fist, and in turn, a new one would be appointed. And so what ends up happening here is we basically learn that the reason why Davos is operating as an agent for Mother Crane is because of the fact that when the sentence was implemented against Orson Randall, and when he was basically pursued by Crane Mother's agent, her immortal weapon, that Orson Randall had killed that immortal weapon and fled Kunlun. And so ever since then, Crane Mother has basically sworn a vendetta against Orson Randall to basically bring his life to an end. And the reason why is because of the fact that Crane Mother can only give birth to an immortal weapon every 300 years. Now, what this shows us is that the different heavenly cities, Kunlun and all these other heavenly cities, have their own variants by bringing about their immortal weapons. Where Kunlun basically has a particular person fight Shu Lao the dragon, and if they defeat the dragon, immerse their fists in the dragon's molten heart and access the Iron Fist energies, what other cities do is like they'll give birth to their immortal weapons. And those immortal weapons will have all the same kind of powers and all the same kind of abilities that are similar to Iron Fist, but it basically kind of rooted in that own individual city. So what ended up happening is because of the fact that Orson Randall killed the immortal weapon of Crane Mother, she's basically gone to Davos and says, we will give you whatever it is that you need, whatever kind of training you need, or whatever kind of energy you need, or whatever it is that you need in order to make yourself a weapon that can kill Orson Randall. We will give that to you. You will serve your purpose, and then you will fight alongside us in the tournament of the 7 heavenly cities. And so again, this is really kind of cool because what this does is it basically has Danny Rand and Orson Randall heading back to Rand Industries after everything that's been going on so far. But when they arrive there, they're met with Davos. And this is really just sort of Matt Fraction kind of wrapping up all loose ends, simply saying that where Orson Randall is here, he can't afford to be here. That it's easier to simply just get rid of Orson Randall and let Iron Fist Danny Rand sort of continue on from there. And that's really exactly what happens. I mean, where they're facing off against these Hydra agents, where Jaren Hogarth had taken off to meet the Heroes for Hire to tell them what's going on, and he's attacked, they're all attacked by various Hydra agents. And what this does is it basically sees the death of Orson Randall. Orson Randall is effectively killed by Davos. Now, of course, Davos immediately turns his sights to Danny Rand, right? I mean, that's just how it is. Like, they're just mortal enemies. Davos would take any opportunity to face off against Danny Rand. And this is an opportunity that's granted to him. The difference here is that with the death of Orson Randall, Danny Rand really just kind of like plunges his heart in Orson's chest and draws on the full energies that basically exist for the Iron Fist technique. And so because of this, Danny Rand's basically at full power now. And again, what ends up happening is he basically overpowers Davos in the extreme. I mean, Davos just cannot keep up. And so what happens is Davos basically retreats and operates under the guise, or really just says, the tournament of the 7 heavenly cities is coming. And when it does, we will fight on even ground. And when we do, I'll prove to be the one that's on top here. And so of course, what this does is wraps up pretty fast with regards to the fact that where Danny Rand intends to basically kill one of the members of Hydra, that in the end, we basically have UT, of course, again, the leader of Kunlun alongside Lei Kung the Thunderer, the trainer of Danny Rand, show up and say, the tournament of the 7 heavenly cities is starting. You have to come with us and you have to participate in this tournament. Now, at this point, if I remember correctly, and I'm not going to swear to this, but if I remember correctly, Matt Fraction, or maybe it was some other writers, released a series of one-shots that covered some of the other members of the either of the Iron Fist that have carried the mantle of Iron Fist or are operating as part of the 7 heavenly cities. But they're really kind of cool one-shots. They're pretty interesting. But this goes into the tournament of the 7 heavenly cities, and it's actually pretty cool to see. But again, I mean, this run was only 24 issues long. It was pretty short. It's 4 or 5 videos in total. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.